On the 22nd of May this year, Pakistan Airways Flight 8303 crashed in a residential area of Karachi. The preliminary indications are that the first attempted approach continued down to the runway with the landing gear retracted. The aircraft touched down on the engine pods before a go-around was initiated, causing major damage and resulting ultimately in dual engine failure on the second approach. Of the 99 souls on board, 97 were killed, with one additional fatality on the ground. The accident raises a lot of understandable questions. Why were the stable approach criteria repeatedly violated? Why did they not go around? How did the crew forget the landing gear? Why did the crew ignore the cockpit warnings? In short, what were they thinking? Well, whenever we see behaviour that prompts this question, it is likely that it results from an overwhelming emotional reaction of some kind. To start with, it is important to recognise that, unlike, say, birds, bats or bees, human beings are not naturally evolved to fly. On the contrary, we are evolved to live in caves and hunt and gather our food. That we are able to fly at all is testament to the wondrous device that is the brain, or specifically the neocortex, or what we might call the human brain. This endows humans with their unrivaled capacity for calculation, reasoning and problem solving, as well as our unique ability to imagine things which do not physically exist in the world. Meanwhile, the rest, which we may collectively term the chimp brain, represents the sum total of the automatic functions necessary for survival. In particular, the response to threat, which is automatic and immediate. A physiological state of stress is induced, preparing the body to react to the threat, and at the same time, an emotional response is triggered, providing the necessary impulse to initiate that reaction. This will typically be anxiety or fear, but may also be anger or depression. So far, so good. We use our human brain for active conscious thought, while our chimp brain functions automatically to keep us alive. However, humans will insist on attempting ridiculous and unnatural feats, such as flying. In these circumstances, behaviour which is dictated by the chimp brain will likely be unhelpful. But to ask the question, say, why did the pilot do such a stupid thing, is to skip over the more fundamental question of why on earth was a cave-dwelling hunter-gatherer trying to fly? By way of example, let us return to Pakistan Airways Flight 8303. Now, much of this is of course speculation, but we do know that the flight was cleared by ATC to be 3,000 feet at Makli. Being 15 miles from the airfield, a height of 4,500 feet would be acceptable. However, by this point, the aircraft was still at nearly 10,000 feet. Clearly an error has occurred at some point. The immediate and automatic response of the chimp brain is to treat this error as a threat and induce the stress response and its concomitant emotional reaction. As an aside, this is the problem with the approach to pilot training which seeks to eliminate pilot error by some means of punishment. This does not decrease the likelihood of error, but does increase the level of anxiety triggered by making an error. Whatever its provenance, the emotional reaction has a further unfortunate effect, that of distorting our perception of reality. For, again, perfectly sensible evolutionary reasons, a heightened emotional state makes us assume a worst-case scenario. Rather than perceive this situation in terms of altitude, airspeed and options, our pilot likely perceives something like, "This is a calamity, everything is going wrong." The effect of that thought being to increase the stress and levels of activity in the chimp brain, hampering his ability to select the better course of action. This explains for me why, as the aircraft approaches 10 miles, still way too high, the behaviour exhibited is that of deploying the landing gear and increasing the dive. To select the option of going around requires conscious choice, the full participation, as it were, of the human brain. As this approach continues, the pilot's human brain is rapidly losing capacity, as neatly demonstrated by the fact that, as the aircraft captures the glide slope, the gear is brought back up. An unthinking, automatic chimp brain action. At this point on the approach, move the gear lever. It's not a decision, it's not for anything, it's little more than a reflex. The approach is by now grossly unstable, but the pilot's mental state has been utterly overwhelmed by the activity in the chimp brain. Warnings and indications from the aircraft are detected by his auditory and visual systems, but the pilot has no way to process their meaning, much less to select the appropriate course of action and go around. The only thing he is capable of doing right now is what he usually, habitually, does: get the plane down on the runway and finish this. In a cruel twist of irony, his chimp brain perceives that as the quickest route to safety. Only when the aircraft touches down on the engines and scrapes along the runway does the pilot finally initiate a go-around, with the ultimate fatal result. I said earlier that the initial error caused a stress response, but that isn't the full story. The CVR demonstrates that for most of that flight, the crew were preoccupied with a conversation about the COVID-19 pandemic and its threat to the industry. Their background levels of stress and anxiety were already significantly above the norm, enough to reduce their capacity to the extent that any additional stress was nigh on impossible to manage. And this is not something confined to this crew or even to Pakistan Airways. Globally, we see airlines struggling or failing, making cuts and downsizing. Pilots the world over are under threat, potential or actual, of poorer terms, harsher conditions, and losing their jobs, and yet are expected to operate every flight calmly, professionally, and safely. The industry must be alive to the very real risk that Pakistan 8303, far from being a terrible aberration, could be the first of many. So can we just somehow ban emotion from the flight deck? I hope I have made it clear that this is not just an unreasonable expectation, but a biological impossibility. Moreover, it is not desirable. Say I asked you to choose one of these colours. Most could do that in a matter of seconds, even though there is no logical reason to choose any particular colour. The efficiency of that process is owed to this small section of the brain which acts as a bridge between the human and chimp brains. The human brain makes a partial decision based on logic and then cross-checks it with the chimp brain to see if that decision feels good. That we can intuitively improvise in new situations is why human beings are still necessary parts of the aircraft equipment. Our calculation and reasoning separates us from the animals, to be sure, but it is our ability to emote, to feel, which separates us from computers. So what can we do? My belief is that training can play an important part in the enhancement of pilot well-being, which I hope we have established is fundamentally necessary to safe and efficient flight operations, if anything more so when the industry, let alone the world, is vulnerable. To begin with, we must ensure that pilots understand their own emotional reactions and have the tools to manage them. I don't propose to go into detail on those aspects here. I've spoken elsewhere on how techniques derived from psychotherapy, i.e. the process of enhancing mental well-being, can enhance non-technical training. But I think, interestingly, that the converse is also true. That is to say, if we look at training non-technical competencies beyond the flight deck, we can go some way to enhancing mental well-being. The core pilot competencies identified by ICAO are trained by practicing the associated behaviours, such as listening actively and demonstrating understanding when receiving information, monitoring, reviewing and adapting decisions as required, offering and accepting assistance, delegating when necessary, and asking for help early. This demonstrates the importance of a robust competency-based training program, hopefully one based on observation and positive reinforcement of these desirable behaviours. We train pilots to, amongst other things, communicate, solve problems, and manage their workload on the flight deck. Why not in the rest of their lives? And I am not saying that we only give pilots what amounts to well-being training and pass all the responsibility to them. Lest we forget, our industry is staffed by emotionally vulnerable human beings who are at present finding life just as hard to cope with. I would suggest that at the level of the individual manager, crewing officer, HR worker, engineer, NAA staff member, etc., 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 we might say, here's how we train our pilots to manage their workload and communicate effectively. Perhaps you might apply the same strategies. Because fundamentally, whilst the potential consequences of a misstep are generally not as immediately lethal, navigating through modern life is just as complex and unnatural for individual human beings as flying is. But what about organisations? Well, here I am indebted to the work of Dr. Seamus Fan, with whom I had the honour to share the platform at APATS 2016 in Singapore. It was from him that I learned the lessons in leadership from, amongst others, Confucius, who said, "For nations or entities to achieve orderliness and peace, people must return to traditional virtues. All virtues stem from Ren." Ren is one half of the doctrine of Ren Qi, loosely translated as benevolence and compassion. And what was true in the 5th century BC is no less true today. Those in positions of leadership who wish their organizations, airlines, ATOs, regulators or trades unions to return to orderliness should practice benevolence and compassion. Confucius himself advocated the notion of benevolence without great expenditure. We can, for example, make greater effort to praise a pilot's management of error than to threaten punishment for having made the error. Similarly, whilst some of what we expect of pilots' behaviour is necessary for safety, much is nice to have. We can treat with benevolence those pilots who wisely choose to manage their expectations of themselves. That said, it seems likely that in the short and medium-term future we are going to have to accept, with compassion, increased absenteeism and decreased efficiency. The crew of PK8303 found themselves in a difficult situation and sought a return to normality, i.e. the runway, but allowed their efforts to be dictated by their chimp brains and not the careful, considerate approach of their human brains. Likewise, the aviation industry is in a difficult situation, and a desire to return to how things were is entirely understandable. But if we allow our efforts in that direction to be driven by our collective chimp brains, we risk doing more damage than if we allow decisions to be made in line with our reason, our compassion, and our human brain competencies. The industry faces many challenges over the coming years, technical, financial, even structural. But there has never been a more important time to consider the intelligent, reasoning, creative, emotionally vulnerable, flesh and blood human beings whom we place at the controls of our aircraft. Thank you for listening.